The Roman Empire once had a 22-year-old emperor's horse in the Senate. Or did it? History is full of bizarre stories, but few are as famous or as misunderstood as the tale of the Roman emperor who supposedly made his horse a senator. The image is almost absurdly cinematic. A marble hall filled with Rome's most powerful men, and among them stands a horse draped in purple, the symbol of imperial authority. But behind this outlandish story lies a fascinating mix of myth, propaganda, and political commentary. This is the story of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, the 22-year-old emperor whose short and chaotic reign, 37 to 41 AD, became one of the most infamous in Roman history, and whose love for his horse, Incitatus, became a lasting symbol of imperial madness. The young emperor and the legacy of Augustus. When Caligula became emperor in March of 37 AD, the Roman world had been through decades of political upheaval. His great-grandfather was Augustus, the first emperor of Rome and architect of the imperial system. His father, Germanicus, was one of Rome's most beloved generals, a hero who had campaigned successfully in Germania and was widely expected to become emperor himself, until he died under mysterious circumstances. The young Gaius grew up surrounded by both privilege and danger. His nickname, Caligula, Little Boots, came from the miniature soldier's uniform he wore while accompanying his father's troops. Romans adored him as the child of Germanicus, but that affection would turn to horror within a few short years. At just 24 years old, Caligula found himself ruling the most powerful empire in the world. At first, the people celebrated him as a savior. He abolished unpopular taxes, freed prisoners, and granted generous bonuses to the Praetorian Guard. Statues of his family were restored, and public games were held in his honor. But within months, the adoration gave way to fear. Caligula fell gravely ill, and after recovering, he seemed to undergo a psychological transformation that would define his reign forever. Madness or strategy? Ancient historians such as Suetonius, Tacitus, and Cassius Dio described Caligula as a monster, cruel, paranoid, and delusional. He allegedly declared himself a god, demanded that statues of himself be placed in temples, and enjoyed humiliating senators and nobles. But modern scholars debate how much of this is true. Many of the sources we rely on were written decades after his death by senators who had every reason to portray him as insane. Caligula's so-called madness may have been, at least in part, a deliberate act of political theater, a way to assert absolute authority over a Senate he despised. It's within this context that the famous horse story emerges. The legend of Incitatus. According to Suetonius, Caligula's favorite horse was named Incitatus, which means swift or impetuous. The emperor treated the animal with unimaginable luxury. He gave the horse a marble stable, an iron manger, purple blankets, and jewels. Servants were assigned to care for Incitatus day and night. But Suetonius goes further. He claims that Caligula planned to make his horse a consul, one of the highest political offices in Rome. Cassius Dio, writing in the 3rd century, adds that Caligula once invited the horse to dine with him and joked that the animal would soon be a priest. The story quickly became legend, the ultimate example of imperial arrogance and insanity. For centuries, Caligula's horse senator has been retold in classrooms, documentaries, and even political debates as proof of how absolute power can corrupt absolutely. Yet there's a good chance it never actually happened. Satire or symbolism? Most historians today believe that Caligula never actually appointed his horse to the Senate. Rather, it was a mockery of the Senate itself. By threatening to elevate a horse to the same rank as Rome's highest officials, Caligula was sending a clear and humiliating message. You senators are so useless that even my horse could do your job. It was political satire of the darkest kind. This interpretation fits with what we know of Caligula's relationship with the Senate. He frequently belittled them, forced them to grovel before him, and treated the imperial office as a stage for his personal amusement. The story of Incitatus may have been an exaggerated rumor born from his contempt for the governing class and from the senator's eagerness to slander him after his death. The psychology of power. Whether Caligula was truly insane or simply cruelly theatrical, the story of Incitatus reveals a deeper truth about absolute rule. At 22, Caligula held total control over a vast empire. He could command legions, dictate laws, and execute political rivals without consequence. Such unchecked authority often breeds eccentricity and sometimes madness. His behavior, from extravagant games to bizarre decrees, can be seen as a mix of narcissism, isolation, and paranoia. Even if the stories are exaggerated, the image of a young emperor blurring the lines between spectacle and governance captures something profoundly human: the fragility of sanity under the weight of absolute power. The fall of Caligula. Caligula's reign lasted less than 4 years. In January of 41 AD, members of the Praetorian Guard, angered by his cruelty and fearing for their own lives, conspired against him. The young emperor was assassinated in a palace corridor, reportedly stabbed more than 30 times. His wife and infant daughter were also killed. After his death, the Senate debated restoring the Republic, but the idea quickly faded. Instead, Caligula's uncle, Claudius, became the next emperor, proof that the system Augustus had built was far stronger than any individual ruler's madness. Myth, memory, and the horse that lived forever. The story of Caligula and Incitatus endures not because it's entirely true, but because it's symbolically perfect. A horse in the Senate encapsulates everything people fear about tyranny: the absurdity, the arrogance, the total disregard for reason. Over time, the tale has transcended history and become a political metaphor. Modern writers and commentators often invoke Caligula's horse when criticizing leaders they see as unqualified or foolishly elevated to power. In that sense, the story's power lies not in its literal truth, but in its timeless lesson. Whether or not Incitatus ever set hoof in the Senate, his name remains etched in history as a warning of what happens when pride, power, and insanity meet at the summit of empire. Conclusion. The Roman Empire never officially had a horse in its Senate, but it did have an emperor young enough, bold enough, and unrestrained enough to make the world believe he might. Caligula's reign, brief though it was, still fascinates us nearly 2,000 years later because it sits on the knife edge between myth and history, madness and manipulation. And so, even if Incitatus never wore a purple toga or cast a vote in the Senate, His story endures as one of history's most unforgettable reminders. In Rome, as in every age, power can turn even the most brilliant promise into tragic absurdity.